In his concurring opinion on Jacobellis v. Ohio in 1964, Justice Potter Stewart stated that while he couldn't define pornography, he knew it when he saw it. While we still have some issues determining what is obscene, largely due to the wide variety of moralities in our society, I do find this definition useful. A lot of us can identify amorphous and subjective things without really being able to define them. Here in the US, we don't really know what communism is. Though we've certainly gotten an object lesson in what fascism is over the last 7 years, a lot of people can't clearly define that either. Both of these are stuck with their pornography definition. People don't know what it is, but they know it when they see it. Except we don't, because the majority of what we've seen of communism in the 20th and 21st centuries hasn't been communism. It's been fascism. So when we see fascism, we call it communism. And when we see communism, we call it a lot of other things. Anarchy, socialism, or chaos. The reasons we can't define these systems are tied to the US's complex history with the Soviet Union, and specifically to Joseph Stalin. In another video, I stated pretty clearly that Stalin was a fascist, not a communist, and that is a statement that deserves some explanation and context. So let's talk about it. Communism was first articulated in 1848 in the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. While Marx and Engels did call for revolution, they didn't have an idea of what that might look like or what the end result might be. Communism, as per Marx and Engels, was an economic system, one that gave power back to the workers and addressed the incredible inequality of the mid-19th century. Communism is an economic system in direct opposition to capitalism. Communism is a system where workers collectively own what they produce and everyone shares in it equally. Capitalism is a system where capital, money, is exchanged for labor and profits are shared according to a contract negotiated between individuals. Communism is collective and public, and capitalism is individual and private. The shift to making communism a political system, the basis for creating a government, really happened in the early 20th century with Vladimir Lenin. Lenin was one of many scholars and philosophers trying to politicize communism. It was a major intellectual project of the early 20th century. Lenin also worked to adjust communism to be based on a rural proletariat, rather than an industrial one. Russia still used widespread, unfree labor when the Communist Manifesto was published in 1848. Russian serfs were freed in 1861. They had barely half a century of being a proletariat at all by the time 1917 rolled around. All of this came together in the crucible of World War I, which started in 1914. Due to a variety of factors, including stalemate on the Eastern Front, food shortages, and a belief that the royal family was out of touch or even actively harmful to the people, the first Russian Revolution sparked in early 1917. Note on dates. Russia and the US used different calendars at this point in time, so some sources will say it happened in February and others will say it was in March. The first revolution toppled the monarchy. The provisional government of revolutionaries included at least two factions of communists. Lenin, in exile in Berlin, rushed back to Russia to join them and published his April Theses, which became the basis of the Bolshevik government. The next revolution in October of 1917 was between the two communist factions, the Bolsheviki, or the Reds, led by Lenin, and the Mensheviki, or the Whites, led by Leon Trotsky. The Bolsheviki won and established the Soviet Union. The official name was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which we abbreviate to USSR. Lenin, as the leader of the Bolsheviki, was the first leader of the Soviet Union. However, he died shortly after the founding of the USSR. The next leader wasn't Trotsky, the other main participant in the Soviet revolutions. The next leader was Joseph Stalin. Stalin was opportunistic and ruthless. He knew the Communist Party was a route to power, and that is what he wanted. He gained power by hook and by crook. He had some support because he was the Secretary General of the Communist Party's Central Committee. Lenin didn't like and didn't trust Stalin, but the conflict between the Reds and the Whites meant that a large portion of the Communist Party leadership didn't like and didn't trust Leon Trotsky either. Stalin blackmailed opponents into resigning, created scandals for others, and had a whole bunch assassinated to make himself the best option for the next leader. And he was constantly on guard against others doing the same to him, to the point of extreme paranoia. By the end of his life, his paranoia was pretty justified. A lot of people hated him and wanted him gone by any means. Stalin was the Soviet premier when World War II kicked off in Europe. And at first, the Soviet Union was nominally neutral, or at least they signed a non-aggression pact with Germany, but still annexed the eastern half of Poland. The USSR was clearly sympathetic to fascism in the 1930s and the early days of the war. They only changed sides after Hitler violated the non-aggression pact and invaded in 1942. Stalin then joined the alliance with the US and Great Britain, and suddenly that alliance became a political minefield. Because Stalin was a fascist. He believed that the strong deserved to rule over the weak. He wanted to be the strongest, so he manipulated and murdered his way to the top. And he continued those tactics when he got there. Throughout his time as premier, he made rivals at all levels go away. So much so that the word disappeared went from describing something that happened, my keys disappeared, to something that was done to a person. Stalin disappeared people. I mean, he wanted a former ally so thoroughly erased from history, he had photos doctored to remove him. People at all levels of society would vanish without warning, never to be heard from again. Many were murdered, but many were sent to Siberian gulags. Very few people survived the gulags, and we have very few accessible records. Communities across the USSR were decimated. And we knew this was happening. It was an open secret. Stalin was objectively terrifying. The Soviet revolutions were the first successful communist revolutions. The Chinese Communist Party didn't gain control of all of China until after World War II. Cuban communists gained control of the country in 1959, and Vietnam became a unified communist country in 1975. The USSR was the OG, and the only example a lot of people had for what a communist government looked like. But it was never communist. Under Lenin, it was socialist. Lenin believed socialism was the bridge between monarchy and communism. Stalin changed that. The Soviet government controlled everything, and Stalin demanded obedience from the entire population. It was a totalitarian and authoritarian government under Stalin. Fascism's main tenet is that the strong deserve to rule over the weak because they are strong. The only attribute valued in fascism is strength and the ability to control others. Fascist governments, therefore, produce and maintain powerful armies and a strong police force under direct government control. Many fascist governments also have a secret police. Think the Gestapo. Dissent is not tolerated. Totalitarians have total control over every aspect of the government. Authoritarians demand obedience from the population and the rest of the government. Stalin did all of that. He just did it wearing communist clothes. Ideologically, Stalin was a lot closer to Hitler and Mussolini than anyone else, but because Hitler invaded in 1942, Stalin joined the Allies. That was the only reason for cooperation. And after the war, Stalin did what fascists do. He took over territory that had recently been liberated from Nazi occupation. Those countries were too unstable to put up a fight. That made them weak in Stalin's eyes. Therefore, he deserved to rule them because he was stronger than them. Stalin was a fascist. We are scared of communists in this country because many of our leaders are old enough to remember Stalin's rule and the rule of other dictators who said they were communists but were actually fascists, particularly Fidel Castro and Pol Pot. Both of them were incredibly violent in their suppression of dissent, following closely in Stalin's footsteps. They were all fascists. Stalin thought that he had a right to rule, that he deserved power, because he was politically strong. Here's the thing about political strength, though. It's fleeting. Even in a totalitarian, authoritarian regime, strength alone is not enough. Many totalitarian, authoritarian fascists try to be the single ruler of their nation. They try to circumvent the other structures that make a government function. But governments exist because it is not possible for one person to rule a group so large. We have seen time and again that when a totalitarian and authoritarian regime comes to power and concentrates all of that power into a single person, that government fails. Sometimes because that person won't relinquish power or name a successor, sometimes because their rule drives rebellions and they're overthrown. The only example of a totalitarian, authoritarian, fascist government surviving that I can think of is North Korea, and they have the additional wrinkle of being a theocracy as well. The Kim family are considered to be descendants of gods by their most loyal followers who enforce their rule. And that is the difference right there. A government only survives if there are multiple people working to keep it running. The very basis of authoritarianism, totalitarianism, and fascism is a single ruler in total control. If a leader can delegate, they can be successful. But a fascist won't do that. Stalin tried to maintain his control of the Soviet Union through political maneuvers, deportations, false imprisonment, harassment and intimidation, assassination, and murder. Despite all of that, Stalin was never comfortable in his rule. He lived in fear of a rival assassinating him or undermining his authority. Stalin was a fascist, a paranoid, murderous fascist. But he wore a communist uniform and spouted communist rhetoric, so the rest of the world, especially the US, never looked beyond that facade. I hope I gave you some food for thought. Let me know what you think in the comments. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. To support the channel more directly, please go to patreon.com/h3 and become a patron. The link is in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.